In Barnaby Rudge, in 1841, we've got an illustration cartoon by Havelock Brown. Barnaby was one of the riot's leaders, but probably a bit naive. And he's in his condemned cell with his raven grip. I don't know, I've never read Barnaby Rudge, but it's the closest one to the Gordon riots. Dickens' historical novel most closely associated with the Gordon riots in Newgate, 1780, when it was burned down. And I managed to find a picture just a few days ago of Lord George Gordon there. Luckily for Barnaby, he was pardoned. That, of course, is fiction, as was Gordon, which we know was fact. But strangely, what happened is that Gordon converted to Judaism and then was convicted of treason. And he ended his days miserably in Newgate, 5 years, 1788 to 1793. So he wasn't punished for the Gordon riots, but much, much later, 1788, bit of a sad end. Anybody being stuck in Newgate for 5 years. The authorities at that point were really after him, I suppose. But it's Barnaby Rudge. Well, Barnaby Rudge are most associated with Newgate and the Gordon riots, and of course the best one of all is Great Expectations, 1861, one of the last novels. Philip Pirrip visits Abel Magwitch in Newgate just before he dies in his bed in Newgate. Pip tried to get him away to Australia, but he came back to England illegally after being transported for life. Upon being challenged on the Thames by police, Abel and Compeyson, as I'm sure many of you know, fight and fall into the Thames. Compeyson dies, but Magwitch survives, but he would have hung if he'd survived because he'd come back illegally. If you were transported for life and you came back, you could almost certainly hang. Solomon's actually managed, one of the few that did come back, and he got around it somehow. Race for Wealth. I'm not going to spend too long on these pictures, but by W.P. Frith, one of the rare paintings of prisoners. It's remarkable that the penitentiary at Millbank prison is where the Tate Britain is now. So bad it was actually knocked down. Is like the Old Bailey, doomed to destruction, will soon cease to be a prison. I'm not sure about that. It survived quite a lot. I mean, it's 1882. Again, it's a Museum of London picture. On the right is the one I prefer, Newgate Exercise Yard by Gustave Doré. He and Blanchard Gerald made a pilgrimage there, believe it or not. And the guards, as you can see on the right, are wearing top hats as they go round and round and round in Newgate. He portrayed the working class very well on the dockside, dockyard scenes particularly. This one is in a way more realistic by Frith. It's one of a series. I haven't been able to get hold of the other ones, but it fitted the talk, so I thought it would keep it in for you to have a look at. I don't know much about it, unfortunately. It's a bit annoying, but at least I do know who the artist is. The Race for Wealth, and this is the retribution for those that fail and get caught. St. Sepulchre without Newgate. Bells tolled the condemned to their execution. London's largest church, the bells of Old Bailey. All you that in the condemned hold do lie, prepare yourselves for tomorrow, you shall die. A lovely service, as I'm sure you can imagine. Seems a bit mean, really, but still. It's quite a nice church, as you can see. It still is. Still there, more or less, although there's a whole chunk of it, I think, pulled down and died in, got demolished virtually in the Blitz. But that is what it looked like, the bells of Old Bailey. Oranges and lemons, basically. Edmund Duquesne, prison administrator. Hard labour, hard fed and hard boiled. silent regime, talking strictly forbidden, 8 hours on the treadmill to break the spirit. Oscar Wilde had already spent time in Newgate and suffered hard labour when transferred to Wandsworth and then Reading jail. Wilde himself got 2 years hard labour, as I'm sure many of you know. In 1895, 39 prisons had the hated treadmill. They were all abolished finally in 1902. Now, the captions on some of these pictures aren't very good. I wonder if this is actually from America. It is a prison picture. I accept that. I accept it's a genuine picture, but it may be in America, but I still use it as an example of prisoners stuck on a treadmill. Edmund Duquesne, he might be popular today with many people. Hard labour, hard fare, and hard board. It's a tough life being in prison for obvious reasons. Thomas Neil Cream, a serial killer. Scottish-Canadian doctor living in London, an illegal abortionist, convicting of poisoning at least 5 people in London and the USA for money and possibly sadism, unfortunately. He was caught, actually, only after he attempted to blackmail and frame others for the crimes. He wanted the money, that's what he was after. The unsubstantiated rumour is that as he was just about to be hung or hanging, he shouted, I am Jack the Lambeth poisoner. Amelia Dyer on the right, the baby farmer, serial killer, the ogress of Reading, responsible for killing perhaps 400 infants. Trained as a nurse, widowed, 1869. She began to murder children who were left in her care for money. Many mothers didn't want children, didn't want the children they had or the babies, or at least if she could look after them, perhaps while they were working or working away, she just dumped them. She killed the children and dumped them. She was caught only after an infant, a baby, in a bag, in a case, let's say, was found in the Thames, and nearby 6 more bodies were also found. And this is an arrest photograph of her. These 2 have been dramatised documentaries on the TV in the past. Coming towards the end now, as I'm sure many of you will have realised, the executioner was James Billington. Birdcage Walk or Dead Man's Walk. Few condemned prisoners led along this tunnel, which joined Newgate to Old Bailey, realised they were walking over the gravestones they would soon be buried under. In fact, on the left-hand side, you can't really see it, some of the initials were often scratched on the wall of the prisoners who had been buried. I'm not sure exactly what the word is here, along here, but some of the names would be scratched on the walls after they'd presumably been buried. But that joined Old Bailey to Newgate and back again for the execution were in place. The execution room itself, which I showed you right at the beginning, James Billington, executioner, 1884, chief executioner, who executed both Cream and Amelia Dyer, 1891 to 1901. His sons followed in his footsteps. There was never a shortage of candidates for the job. And he succeeded James Berry, who developed the long drop, the idea that you weigh the man and you try and work out what's the length of rope you need and drop to snap the neck quickly, not strangle the man. Inside executions, away from the public's gaze, only began in 1868. And they lasted till the prison was demolished in 1902. It seems 1,169 executions. I would have thought that's rather small, but that's the figures that are published. The execution room, the illustrations there of Newgate. And just a few more to show. This is the chapel on the top left, where the condemned man would sit. The central courtyard here, very forbidding, very grim. Don't forget, Jack Shepherd got out. Well, it may not have been exactly like this, but Jack Shepherd got out of there twice. And on the right, I assume that's the door for the exit to come out. That's what they're showing. Anyway, welcome freedom for the lucky ones. I don't know if that enters onto Newgate Street or exits to Newgate Street or Old Bailey, but either way, that's the door you want to go through if you can get out. This is always quite grim. It doesn't exist now. It's been all modernised, and of course, the Newgate itself was knocked down. Just to finish off, two more to show. Last but one, looking down Old Bailey from St Sepulchre, Newgate Street, in 1894. St Paul's is here, the two spires on the top left. I think this is the church down literally on Ludgate Hill. Skinner Street would be here, but a lot of it has been demolished even at this earlier point. The most notorious prison of cruelty and misery. It looks very quiet there, maybe a Sunday morning, I would think. It looks very empty there, even for 1894. There's very little joy. And the last one I'm going to show you is a painting virtually of the same thing. Newgate Prison by Mary Edith Durham. Now, it's in the Museum of London, just before the demolition is going to start, to extend the Old Bailey, which of course it does now. It covers the whole of this corner. This is looking down Old Bailey. This goes back, of course, to St Paul's Cathedral, which is in the background there, in the smoke and fog and clouds of the day. It's a very strange topic for a painting and for a woman. She's quite a well-known artist, has work in the Museum of London. I'd never seen this one on display. And as I say, soon after she painted this, it was demolished. So just to round off, I mean, I assume that she's trying to show the good and the bad. This is everyday London life. We've got horse-drawn carriages, hay cart over here, a bus on the left. I do wonder if this is actually the artist going across, Newgate Street, going across there. I have a detail of this that I show sometimes. We've got brand new lights here, gas lamps, brand new. This is all new. We've got telegraph wires, telephone wires up here. So this is new, and this is the old. And I do wonder if she's trying to show that, but that's the nicer side. What I've tried to show you, just to round off, if we can get back, I'll stop the share. Here we are. Just to round off, what I've tried to show you is Newgate through quite a few centuries. I've concentrated on the 18th and 19th centuries. This is not a happy talk, the sort of thing that I would normally do, to often talk about nice subjects. This is not a nice subject, obviously. We're talking about criminals and executions. Many of those prisons were demolished. New prisons like Holloway and Pentonville were new then. But I hope I've shown you something of Newgate Prison and some of the prisoners, just a few of the most famous ones that were in there. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much for coming. That will do for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Has
I hope I
anybody
haven't gone too long.
No, that's fine. Has anybody got any questions for Jeff?
Yeah, you said when it was an open prison, people could come and go. So what rules did apply then, to stop the wrong people coming and going?
I assume the same as now. If you tried to escape or escaped, you were put back in a prison that wasn't an open prison. Most people think that open prisons are new, but obviously that prison has been there quite a few years, obviously. I said that. But if it was a small debt and a non-violent person with their family, they're not going to want to cause too much trouble, particularly if they can get the money to pay off the debt. You see, in 1824, Dickens' father, John Dickens, went into prison because he owed around £400 to his baker. So he went into prison in around February 1824, and the family joined him, except Charles. Charles didn't join him in the prison. His sister Fanny looked after him. And this is a period in 1824 when he was very miserable, where he was alone, a bit like Oliver Twist on the streets. But in around May 1824, an aunt of theirs died and left John Dickens around a large amount of money to pay off most of the debt. So Charles's father and the family came out of the prison and they all rejoined as a family. So I assume, as it is today, if you had a small debt and you had people desperately trying to raise the money to pay off that debt, you wouldn't want to cause any trouble. But if you tried to escape or just left and never came back, you'd go into another prison, maybe Newgate. That's what I think, anyway.
Yeah.
I was reminded when you were talking about a book called The Devil and the Marshalsea.
The Marshalsea, yeah.
The Marshalsea is another prison, isn't it?
It's demolished. There is a museum, I can't think what it is, Lambeth or Southwark, where they have a piece of the Marshalsea still standing. It's in the it's a museum exhibit, basically. It was a walled prison at Lambeth where Charles Dickens visited his father.
Yeah. As I recall from the book, it was divided along the length by a wall.
That's right. There was I've got other pictures you see that I use. There was a massive wall around it, but inside the sort of courtyard area, it wasn't just a prison. There were small little cottages or houses where the family could stay isolated, but as a family unit. As much as having prison cells, it had literally small houses, the only way I can describe it, behind the prison walls where the family could stay as a unit.
Yeah, and the wall down the centre, I think, divided the hardened criminals on one side.
That's right.
The softer criminals, the ones who perhaps hope that they'd be able to pay off their debts.
I think that's more in Little Dorrit as well. With the Marshalsea, yeah, it's Little Dorrit that brings out. I tend not to show I do show it sometimes when I talk about Dickens, but I don't often go into Little Dorrit, funnily enough. Yeah, I think that comes out more in Little Dorrit. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Why do you think public executions were so popular? I mean, I know there was no television and cinema in those days, and some parents deliberately took their children to executions, to encourage them to behave, I suppose, and say, you don't want this to happen to you, sort of thing. But it was also a sort of day out, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I've got other pictures that I use for other talks. It was partly the right being shown to everybody. This is what will happen to you if you're a criminal. This is what happens to criminals. People understood that there were very few prisons. That was quite rare. And so prisoners were going to be executed. And so to show that right will always overcome wrong, we do it publicly. It's a public example of the law in motion, basically, of the king's power, of the government's power. And people they loved it, unfortunately. They really did, either at Tyburn, Smithfield, or Newgate. I mean, not every prisoner, they didn't want every prisoner executed. Some were liked. But there were very few instances where the crowd stopped an execution. I don't think I've really come across that ever happening. And crowds really wanted to turn out and see that. Absolutely. Whether or not it's a bit like gladiators, I don't know, because no one's fighting, obviously. But it's the same thing. It was a hard life. People understood that men and women were going to be executed. And so the sentences were very severe. And so people wanted to see that and prove it. And the government wanted to show you what would happen. Nothing.
With Jack Shepherd, as you said, thousands turned out, but that was because he'd escaped several times.
Yep.
And he told them in advance that he was going to escape one more time, didn't he?
He certainly tried to, yes. He certainly tried to. Supposedly, depends what you believe and what you read, he stuck a nail down his throat on the night of the execution. Why would he do that? I often, when I give the talks in person, I often ask the audience, why would he stick a nail down his throat?
So he had something to pick the lock with.
No,
Right.
he did that anyway. He did that. He stuck a nail. So if this is true, the story is he stuck a nail down his throat. So when the noose tightened and he was hanging, it wouldn't crush him. It wouldn't strangle him completely. And so as his body is hanging below, his friends could cut him down and he would still be alive and he'd have a chance. Now that's a story that I do tell. It's in the books. It's the sort of thing you would do. But supposedly they found the nail, they stopped that, and he was executed. And he was lucky. He was buried at St. Martin's. He didn't go to for dissection.
Where do the prison ships come into this?
The prison ships really got going when people began to be transported to Australia, to Botany Bay. So when mid to late 18th century, when they began to transport prisoners there. Yeah.
Were they only used for prisoners that were going to be transported, or
well, I suppose there would be some that would travel on merchant ships, for want of a better word, to work in Australia. But the prison ships, the hulks, were pretty awful. There were hulks in the Thames where prisoners were kept. Then they would be transferred to a merchant ship that's specially there to transport prisoners. Yeah, pretty horrible. Yeah, that's right.
No, nobody got out of the hulks, and
as far as I know, very few. I mean, very few, if any, ever escaped from a hulk. It's a prison.
Yes, yeah, but you'd imagine it'd be easier to escape over.
Well, that's what Dr. I mean, again, I could have put the quote in from Dr. Johnson. He said, "There's no way that he's ever going to become a seaman on a ship because it's just like being in prison and you could drown." That's what Dr. Johnson thought. Yeah. Okay. Will that do?
Any more questions, anybody?
I don't think so.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's been a fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You've got 11 hardened criminals here. Oh no, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm counting myself in that. I better make not that. 10 hardened criminals here.
That's right. All of you who are up without sin, you can throw the first stone. Exactly.
Yes.
But no, it's been fascinating, and thank you very much for your time and your stories, and for the pictures, because that's the aspect we don't normally see, I think.
No.
So if we can give Jeff a round of applause. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thanks very much. Good night.
Good night.
Just to let you know, I'm wearing this in commiserations from last night.
Oh dear. Another 55 years of wearing it. That's a trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.